gender bending. Big in the 80s. People like Boy George, Marilyn, Pete Burns, and then there's of course Freddie Mercury in I Want to Break Free, and well, quite a few others. But I mean, people these days go on about gender as though it's something that, well, we've only just discovered. But in the 1980s, people were gender bending all over the place. I mean, Marilyn used to go out fully dressed, fully dragged up as Marilyn Monroe. But later on, when he got into the pop charts, he toned the image down, well, a little bit. Now, there were mostly the men we think of as being the gender benders of the 80s, but there were some women as well, and I think particularly of Annie Lennox from the Eurythmics, and that famous video of the Eurythmics, Who's That Girl? And in that we see a lot of different female pop stars of the 80s featuring as guest stars, but Marilyn is also in there as well. There's no explanation. He just appears in this video called Who's That Girl? So people were playing around with gender, and quite a lot of the pop acts of that time certainly got in on that. Now, this didn't really start in the 80s. You can go back to the 1970s, and here in Britain there were bands like Sweet and Mad, and of course David Bowie, who were also playing around with gender, men dressing up in, well, things that looked like frocks, dresses, long evening dresses, whatever. Or certainly in Mad, some of the outfits were, well, ambiguous, let's say, and David Bowie obviously exploited that quite a bit. And then also there were some of the hair bands, some of the heavy metal bands wore quite a lot of makeup in the 70s and through into the 80s. So there was, you know, it was thought at the time quite a bit shocking, and you'd get these things in articles in newspapers worrying about what effect all this gender bending was having. And one person I remember who was categorised amongst the gender benders was Harris Glenn Milstead, better known to you, no doubt, as Divine. I'll make a separate video all about Divine because he was a fascinating character. Certainly I remember when Divine appeared on Top of the Pops, the leading pop show in Britain, caused quite a sensation. You know, full drag, full hair and the whole works. And he wasn't exactly the normal, well, whereas Marilyn, say, was very glamorous, Divine had his own look, to be polite. We didn't worry about pronouns in those days. People now talk about gender and they say, what's your pronoun? Is it he and him or she and her? We didn't care. I mean, sometimes you could be speaking to somebody and you'd refer to a man as him. A couple of seconds later, you'd say, oh, what's she up to? Nobody really gave a... Now, what was I wearing in those days? I have to admit, going for a little bit of black nail varnish. Was known from time to time to wear a little bit of blusher, lip gloss. I mean, everybody in the new romantic sort of or Blitz club scene, men were always wearing lip gloss. Yeah, a bit of eyeshadow and eyeliner. I didn't go the whole Marilyn, but you know. And I had quite an interesting conversation on the subject of makeup for men with none other than David Sylvian. I did an interview. You can see an excerpt behind me now from that interview with David Sylvian where he gave me his makeup tips.